We're not talking about the best of them. We're just talking about the rest of them.
Not the worst parts, but the best parts. And the best parts we have. The best of the rest.
Hello, and let me put it this way. Maybe God sleep with you if you're the last man on earth. But we're not on earth. Welcome to Best of the Rest, the show where we take a second look at movies that were poorly received upon release and challenge ourselves to only talk about the things we like and what the movie does well. It's Mars month, and this week we are talking the 2001 film Ghosts of Mars. My name is Chris Logan, and I am joined, as always, by my co-host, who is probably not possessed by a Martian ghost, Andrew Williams. All right, Andrew, you ready for this one?
I am. I am stoked for this one, man. And that's not sarcasm. That's not anything. That's genuine excitement to talk about Ghosts of Mars.
You love John Carpenter. I know this about you. I don't think we've really talked much about this movie specifically, but I know about your love of John Carpenter and his filmography up and down. So yeah, I'm excited to hear your positive thoughts coming this way. I had never seen this movie before. I remember the marketing. I remember when it came out. I remember seeing the VHS or DVD box at Blockbuster. It's pretty distinctive. And I remember thinking, like, what is this? And it looked, kind of cheesy to me, and I kind of just never saw it. Now that I have seen it, it's very cheesy. But as far as I can tell, that's all by design. It is, at the same time, not what I expected, but kind of exactly what I expected, I guess, from a 2001 film called Ghosts of Mars. What about you, Andrew? What is your history with this movie specifically?
Similar. I think I saw the marketing and stuff when it came out. It came out 2001, so I think I would have just towards the end of junior high school, I think. So I was 14. So Ghosts of Mars, I definitely saw the marketing for it, but I didn't end up seeing it. Obviously, then in college, you start watching movies. You become a huge fan of John Carpenter, and you still don't watch it because everybody tells you that it's bad and that you shouldn't. Come on, guys, don't be mean. But then I've spurned on by like watching him perform in concert. I actually sought this out kind of in the aftermath. So that was only probably about 5 or 6 years ago, 6, 7 years ago now, I guess. That I kind of felt the need to like be like, okay, let's watch this stuff that I'm missing. Because you kind of hear that the late stage of his career is kind of not the best, and you kind of don't watch him. And so I fixed that. So I watched it back then, had a lot that I liked about it. It definitely feels like it's also playing in a few sandboxes of things he's done before. So I liked it in that regard, but, just generally, has always kind of stayed on my mind ever since I saw it. There is some wild stuff in this movie.
Now we're about to kind of set the stage and talking about when this movie came out, but it is narrowly a pre 9/11 movie.
Narrowly.
And we've talked about this concept on this podcast plenty of times, how there's this sort of innocence and this different feeling to movies made before 9/11 that we really never made our way back to. Do you think that applies here, Andrew? I mean, it's pretty, God, I don't know if lighthearted is the right word, but I feel like if this movie's made after 9/11, the whole thing is a metaphor for immigration or something. Like, it's got some message underneath it. You know what I mean? Whereas this is all surface level.
Oh yeah. I don't want to go as far as to say they wouldn't make a movie like Ghosts of Mars now, but like you said, it would be much different. There would at least be a lot more apparent allegory. And it's so weird because like it's hard to put a finger on like what makes it different, but like it really does feel like there was this certain genre of movie that just like disappeared after 9/11. And remember when I first watched this, and I didn't mean this backhandedly, but this feels kind of like like, if this movie were directed by anyone else and starred a much more obscure cast, I could have seen it being like a sci-fi original movie. Like, the same plot, the same ideas.
Yes.
The same thing just popping up there. So nowadays, I feel like that's where something like this would appear in relatively the same form. So that's kind of what I mean with, like, its same idea is going to get put on a much less, I won't say necessarily prestigious is the right word, but it's going to be developed on a much cheaper budget with a much different mindset for a much different goal versus what this was, where this is a relatively high profile director with a decent budget, 28 million. We'll talk about that more in a minute, but putting out a relatively essentially higher budget B movie. And yeah, it's a weird thing to put my finger. We've talked about it before, but just it is this weird, like, almost intangible thing sometimes to really think about. So I mean, like just over 2 weeks before 9/11 here, and that's a heck of a thing. That means I was in high school. My mistake. Because I was in high school for 9/11. I was getting my years mixed up.
Thank you for correcting that egregious error, Andrew.
Yeah.
Let's set the stage here, Andrew. This movie is released August 24th, 2001. It's made on a budget of $28 million. At the box office, it only brings in $14 million. You can imagine it wasn't a deep theatrical run for reasons we've already discussed, but I don't think the audiences were coming anyway. Critically, not well received at all. It holds just a 24% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes. You could say this movie is a cult film at this point, but the audience rating is only 25%. So it is a small cult defending this movie, I would say. There hasn't been a grand re-examination of this late-stage John Carpenter movie.
No, and I'm not even going to say that this is a movie where the criticisms are not necessarily invalid. This movie does make some odd choices. We'll talk about them more as we kind of unfold about the movie. But yeah, I was actually surprised to see that the critic score and the audience score almost identical. And again, I've talked about this the last couple of weeks. These are not that small of size samples. We've talked about movies where the critics' reviews are like 30 or 40. And here we've got 110 critic reviews and we got 25,000 plus audience reviews, which is still, in a cosmic sense, not a lot of people, but a decent size for this kind of thing, especially for a movie that's 22 years old now. And it is, there's been a reevaluation of sorts. People kind of feel that it kind of fits into that kind of weird Western subgenre, even though it's a sci-fi movie, just kind of the way it's set up and like kind of the way that some of the scenes are blocked are very reminiscent of Westerns. They're just in the future. There's people that kind of see the Howard.
Can I interject here a second, Andrew?
Yeah.
Normally I just talk over you, but I don't know why I'm being so polite. But this idea of this movie being a Western, I did keep seeing that coming up. I'm going to admit here that I don't understand 100% what defines a movie as being a Western when it's not set in Pioneer Days America or in the Wild West. Like, that's very obvious. And I think, like, when Logan came out, everyone's like, oh, it's a Western. And that was kind of like the whole thing. And I kind of get it. And there's a big analogy with the movie Shane in that movie. It's very overt. And he's like the last gunslinger. And he's this lone hero traveling across the country. Like, I see all that. But I don't see any of that in this movie. This is a group of people. We're in space. Fighting monsters. Like, where is the Western?
I mean, you think about something like
Western?
You think about something like Magnificent Seven, though. Like, Magnificent Seven is a Western. There's 7 people in that. Like, that's in the title, but it's a group of people, and it's a Last Stand type movie. And I think if there's a direct line that I'll draw, it is to something like Magnificent Seven, where we've got a group of people that are basically sought out because, those of you who don't know, Magnificent Seven is just a Western remake of the samurai film Seven Samurai. Basically, a group of people is employed by a town.
I actually did not know that.
Really?
I thought you were about to say the Magnificent Seven is a remake of the film Magnificent Seven because they remade it a few years ago with Chris Pratt and stuff.
No.
Huh. Okay, I've never.
You really didn't
Of
know
those,
that?
I did not know that. And of those 3 movies, I've only seen the Chris Pratt version. I've only seen the newer
Heavens.
Magnificent Seven.
It was but I mean the plots are basically the same. You just that was actually something that happened relatively a lot. There was a lot of westerns that were kind of another big example that actually led to a lawsuit was the movie Yojimbo. Another Akira Kurosawa starring Toshiro Mifune. That was essentially remade as Fistful of Dollars in the 1960s. Just literally like 3 years later, but Sergio Leone did not ask permission to basically remake Yojimbo as Fistful of Dollars, and Toho,
Dude,
which made
have you ever seen
Yojimbo, sued him.
how much Star Wars is in debt to samurai films?
Hidden Fortress,
Like,
man.
You have it all laid out. I never even thought of that before, but like George Lucas just like I'm not saying anything inspired by homage, whatever you want to call it. Like I'm not. It isn't meant as a negative to him, but like once you see like where he lived, it's like going back and seeing Heat after you've seen The Dark Knight. It's like you didn't, remake it, but like the influence is so obvious. Once you realize Darth Vader's helmet is a samurai helmet, you cannot unsee it. It's just a black samurai helmet.
It's all it is.
It's not even being coy about it. It's all it is.
No, absolutely not. Another one, the Star Wars one is very evident. The Heat Dark Knight one. There's a movie called Lady Snowblood. And when you watch Lady Snowblood and then you watch Kill Bill, you're just it's another moment of just like, wait. Hold on, Tarantino. What are you doing here exactly? But,
you're telling me Tarantino was inspired by, influenced by older cinema? Tarantino?
I'm saying this one might go a little bit beyond influence.
Okay,
but,
interesting.
Great movies, both of them. But yeah. Anyway, so you've learned something today, Chris. I will.
Okay, wait, but I still don't. I appreciate the Magnificent Seven comparison.
Yes.
I still don't know what makes this a Western.
What makes anything a Western?
I don't know, Andrew. That's what I'm saying. Other than being set in the West,
I was hoping you had the answer personally. No, but no, I think it's the genre of weird Western is kind of one of those weird like ambivalent things. But the general idea is that it is a Western story that gets implanted with some aspects of science fiction, fantasy, things like that. So like Stephen King's Dark Tower could be another example of like a weird Western because you've got this gunslinger, but you've also got these deep fantasy elements as well. Western is kind of, so for me, when I think Western, I almost immediately compare to like, say, a samurai film. And I look at the plots of samurai films and I could pontificate about this, but Chris, I don't really know. I don't really have any idea. Like,
I feel like I could make the case for almost any movie being a Western in some way. I mean, like, Alita Battle Angel is set in the future. It's robot stuff, but they're bounty hunters tracking down bounties. Andrew, that's a Western.
It's a Western.
I mean,
it's a weird Western. It's
Jerry Maguire is actually a Western. If you think about it,
is it? Is it?
Yeah, I got no argument there.
Is it though? Is it though?
But any kind of action, I don't know. You're like, imagine if this was the West, though, man.
I think the idea is that you've got something like a Last Stand situation, like Magnificent Seven. There's obviously an extended train sequence. I'm just saying,
Okay.
And I think the idea too with this one especially is that you're not in a really kind of urban area. You are in these kind of isolated outposts. So the cities,
a new frontier,
places themselves, dare I say. But in that regard, you've got something with like, okay, we have what, if you look at a town in a Western and then you look at these outposts here, similar vibe, just a few buildings. Typically our heroes are holed up in one of them. There's DNA. I don't know that I would I don't think I would describe this movie to somebody as a Western. But I can, I guess, see where it's coming from.
If you love Unforgiven, you have to check out Ghost of Mars.
If you love Unforgiven, you should check out the Japanese remake of Unforgiven, as a samurai film starring Ken Watanabe.
So that's
And
the
I'm
other
not
way
joking.
around.
Yeah. That was where they got him back. They were like, all right, you stole all of our samurai movies and made them westerns. We're taking your western and making it into a samurai movie. I'm not joking, though. Unironically, great movie. Ken Watanabe is fantastic. Cool. And the story, that was actually the reason they got transplanted so much, is they would look at the stories of samurai movies and be like, this is, all I have to do is transplant this to the Old West and it's already done, basically. It's just easy. The DNA between the two concepts is pretty straightforward. But the Unforgiven remake, which I don't actually think got a serious release over here. I think I bought it on iTunes, which might be the only platform that has it. I literally imported a Blu-ray of that because it was region free from the UK, because it was the only way you could watch it for the longest time. And I went to great lengths to watch that Unforgiven remake, and it's great. Anyway, Ghost of Mars.
And what's the name of that? Is it called Unforgiven still?
Yeah, if you look it up, it's just called, like, there is a Japanese title, but I don't want to murder it, but it's listed in most places as Unforgiven.
This movie is written and directed by John Carpenter. Larry Sulkis also gets a writing credit, a regular collaborator with John Carpenter. Most of his credits are involved with John Carpenter in one way or another. General creative and writing partner, but this is a John Carpenter film through and through. And speaking of things that are hard to define, like Western genre, John Carpenter, all of his movies are like, yeah, that is a John Carpenter movie, but we're changing genres and tone across all of them, but it always feels like the man's work.
Yeah, there's something intangible about that one, too. I'm not really sure how to describe it either. But when you watch a John Carpenter movie, it feels like it. And yeah, Larry Sulkis, I just looked him up. I didn't really familiar. It looks like he was an uncredited writer on Village of the Damned, a 95 joint from Carpenter, actually starring Christopher Reeve. Might be an interesting thing for us to look at someday. Just because I love seeing Christopher Reeve in his non-Superman roles. They Live, he was apparently an additional crew for that one, and then obviously a writer on Ghost of Mars. Has some other interesting like shorts that he wrote, a couple of TV series that he did some stuff on. Just an odd career there, but somehow got into the Carpenter circle and gets the nod here to co-write this. There were rumors for a long time that Ghosts of Mars began as a Snake Plissken sequel, that this might have been potentially a movie like Escape from Mars or something like that, which, I mean,
that sounds kind of cool. That sounds cool.
The joke I always say is that if I ever won a sizable amount of money in the lottery, I would give John Carpenter and Kurt Russell like $30 million and just tell them to make something. Doesn't even need to be like an escape movie or anything. Just do something for me, please. But entertain me, monkeys. Carpenter has denied that this was started as a Snake sequel. He kind of, Escape from LA was not that long before this. So I don't really think he was going back to that well so soon, especially after how Escape from LA was received.
It was actually supposed to be Big Trouble in Little Red Planet. That's how it started. Does that work?
I mean,
is that funny? I don't know.
Big Trouble on Little Mars would have worked. It would have rolled off the tongue a little bit better. The Red Planet, okay. The Red Planet made it a little too wordy. But I love John Carpenter. I don't know if we're talking about John Carpenter at this point. Yeah. So I mean, obviously he's our director here. He's our co-writer. He's written a lot of his movies. He has, I think he's got writing credits on pretty much once he starts making films. I think the only things he doesn't really have writing credits on are The Thing, Christine, Big Trouble in Little China, and there's I mean, I guess almost all of the classics that you associate with John Carpenter, he had a hand in co-writing. And then he does take on some stuff. I actually did just see Christine on the big screen last week. They did a 40th anniversary screening of that, and I said, I'm not doing anything tonight. Let's go watch Christine. And gotta be honest, pretty cool. for a movie made in 1983 about a killer car. I was expecting it to be a lot more cheesy. But there's a scene where Christine crashes into a gas station and then chases after a guy while the car is still on fire. And so it's just this dude running down the street with a flaming car driving after him. And I was like, this is pretty cool. I was like, I got nothing else to say. This is pretty rad. Like,
would you say Ghost of Mars is cheesier than Christine?
Yes, absolutely. Right. I mean, Christine definitely, like, it's 83. There's definitely some outfit and haircut choices in Christine that certainly haven't held up. But I mean, I do love John Carpenter. I hope I get to meet him one day. I thought about it recently, but didn't do it. He's just one of my favorites. I love that he's actually out there doing scores again. Like he did the scores for all of the recent Halloween trilogy. However you may feel about those movies aside, he also did the soundtrack for the recent Firestarter remake. Ironically enough, he was supposed to make the Firestarter movie back in the 80s with Drew Barrymore, but got fired, which is how he went to make Christine. And I guess he was like, well, fine. You're not going to let me make that Stephen King movie. I'll go make this other Stephen King movie. But you can't keep me away from Stephen King, you fools. But I just love John Carpenter. I saw him live in concert where he a couple years ago, he released God, do they have it? We're just trying to see if there's like a quick list of when he did all that. But yeah, so in 2015 he released an album called Lost Themes, which was just basically, I mean, as he described it, it was themes to movies that didn't exist. That's kind of how he described it. And it was really good, atmospheric synth music. I liked it a lot. Like, just reminiscent of his film soundtracks. And then he did a second one in 2016, but then he toured at one point and actually went and played songs from those as well as songs from all of his movies. And so I went and saw one of those shows. I think it was in Austin. And, he played the main themes from Halloween, Escape from New York, Big Trouble in Little China, They Live, Mouth of Madness. The theme to Mouth of Madness, folks, it rips. But just very cool. And it was also started right at 7 and it was over at 9. And I remember just being really appreciative of that because, concerts go so long now. And I was like, this dude knows what's up. He wants to get home and he wants to go to bed. And so do I. And then he's actually got, he released a third Lost Themes album and then actually has another kind of, he's got another kind of re-recording of several soundtrack songs album coming out next month. So it's just cool stuff. I just love everything that he's out there. I'm kind of glad that he's sort of found his way back. After 2010, he kind of sort of faded out there for a little bit. People weren't really talking about John Carpenter, so I'm kind of glad that he's at least out there doing his thing. He is directing an episode of a television show, I think. It's like John Carpenter's Suburban Nightmares or something. It's like a true crime show. It's really weird, but I'm glad he's out there, found something to direct too. So I just love John Carpenter, man. He's one of those guys that even if it's not all working for me, I'm just really glad that he's out there doing it.
Yeah, and it's the kind of thing you got to appreciate these things while he's alive. It's just the day is gonna come when he's no longer with us, and everyone in Hollywood's you make, oh well, he was a legend, and retrospectives and life achievement awards. You can give the man his flowers now while he's here. You can recognize these things before that day comes. It's okay. And let's do that right now, Andrew. Let's recognize all the positives and best parts and what we like about the 2001 film Ghosts of Mars. Are you ready?
I am.
In the year 2176 AD, an elite police force is sent to a remote outpost on the newly developed planet of Mars to retrieve a convicted felon. They arrive to a seemingly deserted town and quickly find that everyone has been slaughtered by possessed, demon-like people. Now the police must reluctantly team with a group of criminals to fight their way out. Andrew, it's a Western. Plain as day, right there. It's very simple. It's we got our good guys, we got our swarm of bad guys. They got to fight and kill their way out. But there is this interesting narrative structure where it's a flashback within a flashback within a flashback. It's sort of told through this branching narrative, and it's set in the year 2176 A.D. as the opening titles tell us. Andrew, do you think putting AD at the end of the year just makes it sound sci-fi for some reason?
Yeah, because the only assumption, I guess, is that I would assume there was an ancient technological society on Mars, because the only other option is BC, which, Chris, that's just ridiculous. That would be
I think
ridiculous.
we pretty quickly figure out when we see these cops and guns and technology and the fact that we've terraformed Mars that it's not BC. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious. I want to say I was going to say the Alien movies do this, but I think they might use like a whole different calendar altogether. But I feel like a lot of sci-fi movies and stuff like throw the AD on there just to make it sound, I don't know.
Well, it's not even right
Sci-fi.
anymore, isn't? Didn't we move to a different classification system? I don't remember. It's like BC.
I don't know.
BCE.
I don't know, Andrew.
I don't know. I'm not a biographer.
But what do you think about the narrative structure here? I thought it was kind of cool. I kind of liked it.
It was kind of cool and I liked it, but it was definitely one of the points of confusion that people brought up in some of the negative reviews of the film, that just the flashbacks inside of flashbacks got a little chaotic at times, because you kind of weren't sure when things were taking place. You kind of weren't sure. Like it was an interesting idea that I think definitely did throw a few people through a loop. Because the whole story is told from present day or present. Where basically we've got Lieutenant Ballard kind of explaining what happened, and that flashes back to this. And then throughout the course of her telling that story, there are flashbacks within that story to other things. And
It's like every time she meets a new character, it's like, oh, you won't believe what I just went through. And, like,
and we flash back. Unfortunately, this movie does not have the Scooby-Doo ending, but we don't find out that Big Daddy Mars was, somebody else all along. But it's I think it's cool in a way, just to kind of do the stacking flashbacks to kind of build out the world. But I can definitely see how for some people that was an odd choice. But at the same time,
I was watching the movie wrong, but I was trying to track. Am I right? This is all her telling the story, so she's got to be present for every scene. Oh, she's knocked out, and we're still telling the story. How does? I guess someone told her what happened. I was watching the movie wrong, but I quickly stopped trying to track it that way because it kind of doesn't work.
Yeah, it doesn't work at all. And then there's times where it does work that way. Like there are times where like she doesn't know what happened with something because she wasn't there, and so it creates a very strange set of circumstances at times. But yeah, I do think it's an interesting approach. I think it was definitely trying to do something a little bit different. And I appreciate the swing regardless.
Well, Andrew, we're going to talk about the swings. We're talking about these flashbacks and the stories and the beats and everything we have here. But first, we got to talk about this cast. Starting with the high point, best casting and best performance of the film, because every episode we recognize one person who goes above and beyond the call of duty that actually elevate the quality of the entire film with their performance, and we recognize that person by giving them the Mark Strong Award. So, Andrew, kick us off here. Who is getting your Mark Strong Award for Ghost of Mars?
My Mark Strong Award is going to the man himself, Ice Cube, as James Desolation Williams.
Cool name.
Yes. My middle name and last name are also James Williams. I am just missing the Desolation, and I would be so much cooler. But unfortunately,
I mean, it's a nickname. You can give yourself the nickname Desolation. Andrew.
Why would that be my nickname, Chris? I can't do that when I'm in my mid to late 30s. But anyway, he is kind of the titular prisoner that is mentioned in the synopsis that's this gentleman, Desolation Williams, as he's called throughout the film. Definitely has like a Snake Plissken kind of vibe to it, like that kind of weird, very specific name. But he is imprisoned when we first meet him, but ends up kind of becoming an ally to our cops on Mars here as they are trying to deal with this Martian threat. And he, he's very much doing the Ice Cube in Anaconda thing, just again, where he's the normal guy that's just kind of reacting to all this increasingly insane stuff happening around him.
He has such a good like stank face though. That like
oh yeah.
I'm sick of this nonsense.
Right.
Yeah.
It's pretty great. And so with that, I think he's perfectly placed here. He said the whole reason he did this because he wanted to work with John Carpenter, so respect. But I think he's in the exact right spot. Obviously, essentially one of our leads here. And at the time, I guess was essentially seen as a pretty bankable name because apparently he was kind of the apparently Jason Statham was supposed to play this character. And they moved him to someone else because they wanted a bigger star for this role. So I guess that's true. This would have been post Friday, post Anaconda, post Three Kings. So I guess he's riding relatively high at that point. So
Dude, Three Kings. I forgot all about the movie. That's a good movie.
It is. That was 2 years before this. And then he was in Next Friday the year before this, and then the year after would be in Friday After Next. So just all upwards for Ice Cube at that point. But and like I still love watching Ice Cube and stuff. I think he's really funny in the 21 Jump Street movies they made. I think as the captain there, I think he's hilarious. He's really funny, and like you said, he's got a really good like reaction face to that. And even just recently, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem, he was Superfly in that movie, and I think he was great in that too.
Great performance. It was funny. I was thinking about 21 Jump Street as well because he plays a cop, which it is funny given his career and origins that he's playing a cop at some point. I feel the same way about Ice-T being on SVU for so long, the man behind Cop Killer. Yeah. But there's a joke in this movie towards the end where Lieutenant Ballard is like, "You'd make a good cop," and he like thinks about it for a second and is like, "Nah." And like at the time in 2001, the joke was like, Ice Cube as a cop? Come on, the man from NWA, it's ridiculous. But now it's almost like the reverse joke where like he would go on to play a cop and he considers it and says no, but we know he eventually does. So layers to that joke, unintentional.
So many layers. That a real ogre of a joke there. But anyway, I think he's doing exactly what he needs to do in this movie. I think he is elevating it. It does give a little bit of life to what could be some pretty it's pretty not like dull in the sense of like boring, but just like pretty bleak movie otherwise because of what's happening with everything that's going on. And he rises to the occasion, makes for some memorable scenes. He interacts well with the cast, and it makes the movie better, which is what the Mark Strong is all about. So, Ice Cube as Desolation Williams.
Andrew, that's a great pick, and I'm glad Ice Cube has a Mark Strong award now. It feels right, you know.
It does.
I totally forgot he was in Anaconda, so we are definitely going to be talking about him again. Giant Animal Month. It's happening at some point. It's a great pick. That's definitely who I remembered being in this movie. He had, as we just established, high profile roles before this, but I just remember in 2001 still thinking like, oh, Ice Cube is like in a movie, like he's acting now. It kind of still had that almost stigma, unfair or not, that he is a musical artist first and foremost and is like trying out the acting thing. But he is, of course, since proven before and after this movie that he's got plenty of other skills. I'm going to give my Mark Strong award to someone else, though. I am actually going to go with Natasha Henstridge as Lieutenant Ballard, who we've been talking about. I really like this performance, and I'm going to attempt to kind of say this and not make it sound backhanded, but like, oftentimes in these movies in Hollywood, this is a role that we see miscast all the time. Like they're a military leader, they're a badass, or whatever the characterization is. But because Hollywood is Hollywood, they only focus on getting the most attractive woman in that role. And there's just something that doesn't jive, and it's not the fault of the actress, and it's something I'm just so used to seeing. And on paper, it almost looks like that's what we're doing here. But I think she is fantastic. I think she totally plays the part of badass commander very, very well. I think she's very well cast. It just, you know what, happens to be a beautiful woman as well. So maybe it's on me for having those expectations for this role. I just feel like that's what I've seen so many times in these movies, but I think she absolutely crushes it. I kept getting like Sonya Blade vibes. I think she would have played a great Sonya Blade at one point in her career, but I think she crushes it. Natasha, of course, most known for the film Species. In fact, I want to go back and watch. If there's anything this movie did, maybe I want to revisit Species. We're talking about it a little bit before we hit record, Andrew. But definitely her most high profile thing. I think she actually stuck around for most, if not all, of the sequels there. Definitely her biggest legacy. But it does this movie here and continues to act. I start recognizing less and less credits as I go through her filmography. But the things I have seen her in, I think she's fantastic. This one, no exception. And I could see things really falling apart with someone else in this role, with someone that isn't believable in the action that's being asked of them, the characterization. But I loved it. They're able to remain stoic without constantly be called like the B word. Like I think they write a lot of lines very well and play the part very well. Totally believable. I was buying it, and she's getting my Mark Strong award.
I think this is a great pick. I agree completely. She's up to the task. She gets to stand up against pretty much anything. She's in on the action. Like you said, these roles are very easily miscast, or they're not really greatly developed or written. This character gets a chance to jump in at pretty much every point. Even gets some weird trippy sequences where she gets possessed, so we get to see that kind of perspective of what that process is like for the host. Things like that. I just thought it was all very, very cool. Like, obviously, Species, I think, is definitely the thing most men our age probably definitely associate her with. That movie being very formative for all of us.
I don't know why you're specifying men.
Who knows? Actually, I take it back. I'm sure that movie was formative for a whole lot of people, just like the movie The Mummy was formative for a whole lot of people.
Awakening people across the spectrum, I guarantee
across the entire spectrum, I guarantee you. I also remember her from The Whole 9 Yards and the sequel, The Whole 10 Yards. That was the other one that I think... I mean, the first one of those was before this. So, yeah, she's up to the task here, and I agree completely. She is doing a great job here. It's very cool to see her right in the thick of things. Like pretty much every single major action set piece throughout this film, she's got a part of. And it's pretty cool. So I think this is a great pick, Chris.
Thank you, Andrew. Let's take a look at the rest of our team here. You mentioned Jason Statham earlier. He's in this movie. I did not know that until his name came up in the opening credits. And he shows up on your screen and I was like, yep, that's Jason Statham. I mean, he's been playing Jason Statham his entire career. We love him for it. I did make a note, though, that this is the most hair I've ever seen on Jason Statham. Now, he still has his male pattern baldness hairline, and it's still technically like a buzz cut, but it's a little bit longer than usual. It's a little bit more grown out than I've come used to seeing. And his character is a little icky. He's constantly trying to get in Lieutenant Ballard's pants, and it's not endearing, but he dies, so it all works out.
Yeah. No notes. No. But yeah, obviously this is really early on in his career. I think the only movies he'd had before this were the two Guy Ritchie joints, Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels and Snatch, which, to be fair, he's in those. And then this is, I think, he's also in a movie called Turn It Up that I'm not familiar with. But then action hood film. Turn It Up is a 2000 action hood film. I've never heard that.
Action. How do you define that genre, Andrew?
A hood film is a film which features aspects of urban African American or Hispanic American culture.
Of course, Jason Statham is in that. Makes perfect sense.
Yes, as you would assume.
He's in what, Collateral, like the next year? What's Collateral? 02 or
2004.
03?
04.
Oh, okay, a little off. Okay.
So a few years later, the Italian Job probably the year before that in 03, and the Transporter in 2002. Transporter might be the one where he kind of
what
everyone's
about
like,
the
oh,
one with Jet Li? When did that come out?
oh, that was the same year as this.
Was it? Okay. I
Yeah.
remember that one.
And then another one he's in called Mean Machine, which looks like another. It's apparently an adaptation of The Longest Yard, starring Vinnie Jones and Jason Statham, apparently. So yeah, very interesting. But yeah, so a smaller part here, but he is very skeezy, whatever you want to call him. Kind of gross, like you said. A lot of inappropriate comments to Lieutenant Ballard, and then, like I said, ultimately does meet his demise, but not before you get a whole lot of really you can see Jason Statham beats people up, which is what you want to see. So he does his job and then promptly dies, which I won't go as far as to say good riddance, but karma does come back around.
Clea Duvall plays Officer Kincaid. They are the rookie of the team. You can tell just kind of the reaction by some of the violence they have to see that they haven't been on the job very long, but they survive most of the movie. I mean, we basically have two survivors at the end of the day, so most of them are going to be dying, but they make it to the final battle, which is more than some of these people can say. Clea, I remember from The Faculty, a movie that I really like, although I haven't revisited in some time. It's probably a good candidate for our show, but she has such a memorable look. Like, I haven't seen The Faculty in 20 years, but as soon as I was watching this movie, as soon as she showed up, I'm like, oh my God, it's the girl from The Faculty. There's this scene in The Faculty that's burned into my brain, Andrew. It's literally the opening credits. It's like showing you the characters in like a freeze frame, and it says their character name, I think is how it works. All right. And she's walking into high school. She passes by a character and scoffs at him. And she goes, this is her line, crash and burn, Zeke. And then freeze frame, and it says her name. And I remember thinking that was so cool. I was like, this is how people talk in high school? Like, is this a line I can use on somebody in a few years? Crash and burn. It's just so cool. I got to high school. That's not what it's like at all. It's not a cool line.
I didn't get to say crash and burn at all in high school.
I missed out, man. This movie lied to me. Yeah, but I remember that so distinctly. But yeah, I love her in that movie. I love her in this movie. I think she's fantastic. I was reading up on her a little bit. Got into directing, still out there creating. Awesome. Great stuff. Very happy for them. Glad to see they are still working on both sides of the camera, but a welcome presence here.
I agree completely. I think she's a good addition here. Like I said, I remember from all the things you mentioned, also Can't Hardly Wait, but I'm a Cheerleader, Identity, and a whole bunch of stuff. She's been everywhere. I think was in the American remake of The Grudge as well. And then obviously tons of TV credits, was on Grey's Anatomy for a few episodes. And then, like you said, even just recently got into directing, has done a couple of films here, including the most recent, looks like it's called Happiest Season, which looks like it got pretty good reviews. So I might have to go check that out. But glad to see her here. Like I said, definitely a face I've seen before. And like you said, kind of the new recruit here, and is like I said, meets a very unfortunate fate, as do most people.
It's a pretty rad death, though.
It is.
We'll talk about it. Pam Grier is in this movie as Commander Braddock. So they're like in charge. I mean, these early scenes, they are leading the squad, barking orders, and they don't make it very far, but they kind of pull like a psycho on us. Like the I don't know if in 2001 Pam Grier was the biggest name, but all in all, I mean, I feel like she's definitely there to bring a certain believability, a certain a presence, bring some Andrew, what does Pam Grier bring into this movie?
Gravitas.
I'm very curious how that's going to sound for anybody listening. Andrew swung his face across his microphone to, I guess, sound like he was a race car passing by, but I feel like it's not. Yes, bring in gravitas, bring in yeah, but I think it's I don't want to use the word stunt casting, but I think it was meant to be a bit of a shock that Pam Grier, an actor who's been working decades at this point and everyone knows, is the first person to die, I believe. Like, and speaking of brutal death, pretty brutal way. I mean, I think we don't see the death, we just see the aftermath.
She dies off screen, no less. Like, she dies off. Like, he goes, like, we're kind of introduced to the heads on pikes that these ghosts are doing, and a Jason Statham is kind of investigating them and just like looks at one and sees that it's Commander Braddock, and it was just like, whoa. And yeah, I mean, this is, I mean, obviously we're decently late in Pam Grier's career at this point. Jackie Brown, I guess, might have been the last relatively high profile thing before this in 97 with Tarantino, but then she was in things like Jawbreaker, Snow Day, the classic comedy film starring Chris Elliott and Chevy Chase. But obviously hugely renowned for her work in the 70s and the blaxploitation cinema, stuff like that. But yeah, I forgot she was in this. Like, that name flashed over the credits. I was like, whoa. And then, like I said, she is dispatched in a rather unceremonious way. But it is pretty gnarly. You don't see it happen, but you see the aftermath, and it's rough.
Do you think, well, let me just ask you, if you were an actor, Andrew, and you're in a movie where you get decapitated and your head ends up on a spike, would you want to, like, keep that head, with the prop head they make of you to put on the spike?
Probably stick it in my window. Just like, you know,
That'd be so cool.
It would.
Yeah, just curious. I feel like most people would. Honestly, a pretty narrow scope in this movie. I mean, that is all of our key players. I guess I do want to shout out Joanna Cassidy, who plays Dr. Whitlock, who is a scientist that they team up with at one point, and they kind of stick around with the group towards the end as well. We learn in her flashback that she is somewhat responsible for releasing all of these ghosts in the first place by uncovering their, I don't know, tomb or whatever you call it. Honestly, they don't give us too much information on the origins of them, but they unearth them. Would it still be unearthed if it's on Mars? What would you call it?
Unmars them.
James Marsden?
We've gone too far. Get out. Eject.
Andrew is okay. Earth is the name of our planet. I understand
yes.
that. But is like dirt and soil called Earth if it's not on Earth? Because I feel like you're almost referring to something else when you talk about like the ground as being Earth. Like, I don't know if you're really referring to like the planet at that point. You're referring to like,
you're not. Like, you if we play by Captain Planet rules, Earth is clearly meant to be like the ground or rocks or formations or things like that. He's not saying Earth as being representative of the whole planet, because if he was, why are the other planeteers needed at all? They would not be,
right?
Because everything is on Earth. I hate that I've thought about this, but yes. So if you are on Mars, I assumed you would just start calling it dirt at that point because you're on dirt. But you know, we unearthed this tomb on Mars. Wait, let's go. I need you to go back. I need you to say that word to me again.
These
you
are
did
things
what
we're
on
gonna
Mars?
have to figure out at some point in our society, but we're not there. We don't have to stress about that yet, I guess.
Elon Musk is too busy making people pay for Twitter than getting to Mars now. So, yeah. But no, now I have something to stare at the ceiling and think about every night for the next 10 years. I appreciate that.
Yep.
Yeah, Joanna Cass, it's good. Like I said, she's got kind of a weird spot where she kind of ebbs in and out. She gets possessed a couple of times, but she's kind of like I said, our link back to what has happened before. And yeah, is like I said, sticks with the cast for most of the movie once she enters. But ultimately, as with many, meets a fate that is not the best. Yeah.
Well, Andrew, there's other cast members here. We can talk about them as we go through our scenes. But like I said, that's our main cast. Those are main players. I think it's time that we talk about the movie itself, specifically the best scenes of the film, starting with our personal favorite. So, Andrew, in your opinion, when was this movie firing on all cylinders, and what is the best scene in Ghost of Mars?
You just kind of mentioned it in that it ultimately ends up being
When everyone dies?
Kincaid's- Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
Right before the final
Yeah.
train sequence. It's kind of our last stand before the final train sequence, which is also really cool. But this sequence is just it ends up being where most of the rest of the cast is wiped off the floor, and we're just basically left at this point with Williams and Ballard. So at this point, pretty much everybody's wiped off the table except for Williams and Ballard. Even like the train tech, like that was like helping them, gets sliced in the throat and falls off. Like pretty much everybody's gone at this point. But this whole sequence is just really brutal. It's cool. It's probably the biggest action set piece to this point in the movie. Obviously, this train sequence that follows it does have a decent amount as well. But I just love watching this. Like you said, Kincaid in particular gets a very cool where she just goes down fighting. Doesn't mess around. Doesn't just to the end, just fighting. Statham goes the same way. They're just fighting these things nonstop. They are giving it everything they got, and still obviously getting overrun. But they do successfully delay everything long enough for, like I said, Ballard and Williams to get on the train and get out of there. But it's just cool. Like I said, it's a big, we're looking again, you think about Westerns, you think about the set pieces, limited buildings, lots of open spaces, a lot of tension there. And then obviously it just devolves into this big all-out melee between our heroes and the titular Ghosts of Mars. I remember reading in the, I think it was the synopsis, and I think they explain it. They're like, they thought the humans were an invading force. And I'm like, but you are an invading force. Like, they thought the humans were invading. I was like, that's exactly what you did. You're I guess props for the awareness, but you quite literally did the thing you think these things are accusing you of. But otherwise, I think the sequence is just really cool. It's when everything kind of really goes out of control. Everybody starts to get overrun. To this point, there's been a lot of like cat and mouse, like these little skirmishes. Maybe one person's getting taken off the table. This is really where it all goes to hell, as it were, and or in this goes to the tomb on Mars. But I think it's great. I love it. Like I said, everybody gets their last stand. They get to look cool. Obviously, Ice Cube and Natasha's still getting to get all their hits in with all the various action sequences before they get onto the train. But I just think this is awesome.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be, it's my pick for best scene too, and I think most people would agree. I mean, it's the big climax of the movie, what you've been building towards. Like I said, there's been smaller action scenes and fights throughout, but this is like an all-out war between the two sides. Our small group of heroes being overrun by this big horde of demons or ghosts, or they never really get like a proper name here, do they? I guess Ghosts of Mars, I guess the title, but like in the movie, they don't ever assign him a name. But I mean, if I really had to zero in to my favorite scene, it's Kincaid's death, though, just those few seconds, because we get these cool hero shots of different characters, and it's just the character, center frame, black background, and they're just firing into the horde, right? We get a shot of all of them just like looking awesome. And during Kincaid's hero shot, this buzzsaw like flies by and she ducks out of the way and stands back up. Then a second buzzsaw flies in, cuts her head off, her head falls off, and then we just cut to the next scene and we just keep moving and we just move on. Like there's no slow motion, there's no spike in the score, there's no fanfare. It's just this quick like, oh, her head's cut off. Or go, whoa, like what? Gotta process like what just happened here. Like just the almost like how nonchalant it is just fascinating to me. I really, that one definitely made me perk up. It's such a cool death. Again, Clea Duvall, did she keep her head? Did she keep that prosthetic head? I know those things like don't last very long, props on movies, so I don't know if you have to put it in like a in like like David Duchovny's hand in Zoolander. You got to put in like some kind of
So
preservation
JP
case
Pruitt,
to keep
dude.
it. Yeah.
If I had a nickel for every JP Pruitt reference on this show, I'd have 2 nickels, Chris. Not a lot, but it's weird it happened twice. I don't even remember the first one. I know I said JP Pruitt. You had no idea what I was talking about the first time. But
Yeah, I just say David Duchovny from Zoo. I
Yeah.
don't have time to memorize characters' names. Get out of here, Andrew.
there ain't no time for that.
Yeah, this scene is a blast.
Is that your
though. I
own
mean,
head in a jar over there? Yes, it is.
Yeah, it's a fun scene, Andrew. This movie's got like a tight runtime. It's a little over 90 minutes. It's the right runtime for the type of movie it is. But it's like this. I almost said it's a slow build to this. It's not that slow considering the
No.
runtime, but like it makes us wait a while before we start seeing these demons and stuff. We kind of find these mutilated bodies before we find out what happened to the bodies and stuff. But like once it gets going, it's a steady increase in action until this big crescendo, and it's a blast.
Yeah, it reminds me a bit of Event Horizon. I don't know if you've ever seen Event Horizon.
Once upon a time, yeah,
It's a heck of a movie.
Heck of a movie.
Probably another candidate for this show. But it just reminds me that we kind of build to the insanity. Like, you start off with like, we're just trying to figure out what's going on. It's a slow investigation of the circumstances, what's going on, kind of, hey, something's weird. And we send a group to investigate. The group investigates and they continue to be like, yeah, we agree. Something is very weird. They investigate further and they continue to be like, yes, something is very weird. And then you kind of get little hints to and from here and there. And then ultimately that kind of builds to this crescendo where the crazy stuff appears. Obviously, Event Horizon being very different circumstances. That one being mostly on a spaceship in space and also has Sam Neill. We may have to talk about that one, Chris. We may have
And
to get to that.
fish. Don't forget about fish. Andrew.
Fish. It's fish.
Yeah, what
You
can
can't
say about
forget about fish. What can you say about fish? It's Cube. But here we got Cube, man. What can you say about Cube? But it's but the build to kind of the ridiculousness and the insanity kind of struck me as very similar. Obviously, the Event Horizon one being also very strange and kind of very lax on details of what exactly it is that we've run into. I do want to give a shout out to Richard Citrone as Big Daddy Mars. I don't think he's ever. I don't know if anybody ever actually calls him that.
I don't think so.
But he is essentially our main Martian villain. His IMDb is actually a who's who of stunt work. Ghosts of Mars is actually probably one of the few times he was actually in something as sort of himself. But looking at his recent filmography,
Yeah, he really got to just be himself in this movie.
Well, he's not doing
wardrobe
stunts
to
for
set, I
somebody
heard.
else. When you look at Big Daddy Mars, it's being played by him. There's no question. But like looking at his filmography, he was Paul Bettany's stunt double in Solo. He was Ben Affleck's stunt double in Justice League. He was David Thewlis's double in Wonder Woman. Like he's done stunt doubles for a lot of people, including Paul Bettany and Ben Affleck multiple times. So this dude's been a stunt guy for Batman, been a stunt guy for Vision. He has done stunts for Gangster Squad, Cabin in the Woods, Thor, Iron Man, The Losers. So he's sort of an alum of the show. But just all over the place with the stuff that he's done. So obviously Big Daddy Mars doesn't talk outside some screaming. Doesn't really say much. But he is essentially the leader of this Martian outfit, this group, cult, whatever you want to call them. Natives that just want the white man to leave them alone. But
There is a
whatever.
metaphor here. Look at that.
There is. You just gotta look a little bit for it. But I just want to give a shout out to him just because he is essentially our main villain, for lack of a better way to put it. And in the following train sequence that takes place after the sequence we just talked about, that's when we get the big Ice Cube, the Desolation Williams versus Big Daddy Mars. Now that sounds extremely John Carpenter when I say it out loud. But we get their kind of big face off, and he assumedly meets his demise. But as we have found out with these Martian spirits, not so much. But yeah, that's probably the next shout out I'd give is this whole train sequence, because we've got Ballard fighting one of the Martians on the train with Desolation Williams fighting Big Daddy Mars on the roof of the train, and it just makes for very cool set pieces, makes for very good contrast, cutting back and forth before they ultimately do succeed. They manage to seemingly get themselves to safety, but they both get, again, we're looking at Ballard in on the action, one-on-one fight where she gets the better of this guy. It's cool stuff, and you'll love to see it.
Yeah, I love the look of these. I usually call them demon. I mean, they're possessed, so that kind of makes me think demonic. But I love the look. I mean, it looks very 2001. You got a lot of leather and kind of this like extreme club look to them. After watching this movie, I sent you a quick edit I did of the poster where I changed the title of this movie to BDSM Club of Mars because that's how all these guys are dressed. Very it's like a club they would go to in the Matrix. It's like that club. But on top,
I just expected them to start playing Judas Priest songs at a certain point.
Yeah, hellbent for leather, I tell you. In addition to all the leather, they also have like these like spikes through their cheeks and knives through their flesh and a lot of like extreme torture like stuff. And you see them like when they first get possessed, like immediately start like self-harming, and they don't dive too much into it. And this movie doesn't really stop to explain a lot of things, but I kind of just got the feeling like if these are ghosts, these are spirits, these are things without bodies, once they're in a body, they are just kind of obsessed with even the ability to feel. It's like just stabbing the stuff through their skin. They're just like getting, or I'm trying to think the right word here. It's pleasure from just feeling anything. So they immediately start stabbing their flesh and stuff. It's a pretty wicked concept. It's a cool look. It looks rad. There's a little bit of like rationale behind it, but I just think that's one of the most distinct decisions this movie makes is the look of these things.
Yeah, there's a little bit of Hellraiser thing going on there, you could say, because in Hellraiser the idea is kind of similar, where it's like the pain is, the idea of Hellraiser oddly is not the idea is never that the people think they're going to experience pain. They think they're going to experience things they've never felt before. Turns out that's pain usually. But definitely a Hellraiser vibe at times with these guys. That's like obviously in Hellraiser they're wearing black leather chains. There's a whole lot of self-mutilation stuff going on there. And that's also kind of what gives me more Event Horizon vibes a little bit too, because in some of the more demonic sequences of Event Horizon, you're getting this kind of weird demonic sense of, I mean, obviously, not spoilers for Event Horizon. The idea in that movie is that when this hyperspace travel they've developed is utilized, they are essentially going to a hell dimension. And then they come out the other side, and that dimension's influence is still felt. So you've got a similar vibe of these people seeking out pleasure and kind of that Hellraiser adjacent vibe of doing awful things to each other with the idea of these experiences and these sensory experiences. And these villains definitely fit into that same vibe of, maybe they never had bodies, maybe they haven't had bodies for thousands of years. But the minute they do, they're eager to feel things and experience things and do this stuff. So, but yeah, this look it's like you said, it's one of the big swings the movie takes. And I think it is one of the most memorable parts. Obviously the big main guy is right on the main poster, in a very, very early 2000s poster, with the way the hands are photoshopped on the side and everything. But like I said, those villains, they've got a unique look, and there are just tons of them. We talked about this a little bit before the show, but it actually, and I say this with #PP, it's a shame there's not a little bit more story behind these guys, because I think there is something very interesting there about these, in a similar way that is something I find a little bit frustrating about Event Horizon, is the explanation of what exactly this dimension is pretty scant. And I guess it's a storytelling decision. You don't inherently need to dive deep. You can let certain things speak for themselves, but I think in both cases a little bit more explanation, I at least would have helped my experience. Even though I do, like I said, enjoy both of these movies, just because you see these interesting pieces and you're kind of like, it's something you want to know more about. You kind of want to understand what the deal is here, and it's. Well, like I said, hashtag PP. It's not a deal breaker in any way. It's just definitely something where I watch it and I'm like, there's definitely a backstory here that I would have loved to have seen. From you get all these hints, you get all these clues, but then they do kind of become this faceless army at a certain point with kind of their main leader, and there's definitely a story there.
There's a YouTube channel I quite enjoy called Good Bad Flicks, where they examine these marginalized movies, forgotten movies, and all kinds of stuff like that. And they kind of give you a lot of backstory in the production and stuff. And there's an episode on Event Horizon, and they talk a lot about how that movie was. Paul W.S. Anderson is the Resident Evil guy, right? They get the right
Yep.
Paul Anderson?
Mortal Kombat, yeah.
Yes. How that movie kind of gets taken away from them in the editing process, and they cut a lot of stuff out. A lot of stuff for content and gore and rating, but also a lot of story stuff, and it gets chopped up in that theatrical version that we get, which a lot of complaints about that movie or criticism is sort of the story not quite coalescing. And it looks like they're on the cutting room floor. There's a lot of stuff that could be put back in to make a more comprehensive movie. I know that movie has its fans, even the way it is, but it sounds like there's this cut out there that would really fill in a lot of those holes. But if we haven't got to this point, odds are we're never going to see it. It's just one of those things.
The rumor is that the footage is gone. That throughout processes and handling of things in the 90s, that the other cuts are not there.
I think you're right. I think I do remember them going over the video. So.
I have heard that there is a VHS with unfinished effects and everything of the long cut, but you can't bring that back. You can't do that.
There needs to be a cut where just when there's a missing scene, it just cuts to Paul W.S. Anderson. It's like, okay, right here, just imagine that Sam Neill is naked
Metropolis.
And he's strapped to the wall here. Just
it's one of those things. It's kind of like the Batman Forever Schumacher cut. Kevin Smith just recently unearthed a VHS copy of that he showed at his
Andrew, please.
Movie theater.
He unmarshed it.
He unmarshed it. My mistake. But apologies, folks. But yeah, and that's what's unfortunate about Event Horizon is that Event Horizon did get taken away from him. That's not really the case here, and not really the case on Hellraiser certainly either. But with Event Horizon, there is a very different version of that movie that exists that I think actually does have some of that explanation in it. It actually does dive a little bit more into what exactly was going on. And that's one of those. It's one of those what ifs. I know there's been endless talk about doing another version of that or a TV show or something, and maybe they'll use that. Maybe they'll take that original script with all that stuff and use that as the basis. I would certainly hope that's the idea, but it's always unfortunate. It was the same with Zack Snyder and Justice League. You just hate to see people get stuff kind of taken away from them last minute, and. In Zack Snyder's case, he admittedly did get to go back and finish it and see it through the way he wanted to do it. But it's always a shame when they can't quite pull that off.
Event Horizon. I imagine we will get around to that on our podcast at some point. Over in our Discord, that guy in Doom dropped a line about this very movie. They said Ghosts of Mars was a movie I watched as a kid and was made fun of for it. How mean. Such an over-the-top action flick. Not quite zombies, not quite demons, somewhere in between. Basically, it was the closest to Doom we got until we got Doom. And it's still the better Doom movie. Ooh, look at that spicy take there. I have not seen Dwayne Johnson's Doom again.
Chris,
I'm sure we'll get to it on this podcast.
That take is colder than most of Mars. But
I guess they are the expert. It just did not dawn on me that their name is that guy in Doom. They have Doom Guy as their avatar.
Yes,
and talking about the better Doom movie.
I don't know who was making fun of him for it. I certainly hope it wasn't his older brother. That would be terrible. That would be really, really awful. But
Never.
I would never. But yeah, it is interesting because it isn't really zombies. It's not quite, like it's called Ghosts of Mars, so you would be led to believe that these are like weird spirits that have been imprisoned on Mars for thousands of years, but it leads to a lot of different things because they get possessed, and maybe, you know, it's these ancient kind of tribal spirits, and that's why they kind of turn to these tribalistic tendencies. And I don't know, but it is they got a great look, that's for sure.
The opening of this movie, I was taking down a lot of notes. I mean, we almost immediately get like this huge exposition dump.
Just massive.
By a narrator that's not even a character in the movie, which I didn't realize till I was looking through the cast. Like, someone totally separate his credit as the narrator. It's not any of our players narrating this movie, but they're catching you up on... I mean, the title credits tell us it's 2176 AD. I already talked about that. They tell us that terraforming is 84% complete, which Wikipedia erroneously says it's 85% complete, but I saw this movie. I took a note. It says specifically 84% complete, which I'll come back to that. It's crazy that so many of our movies we've covered this month are about terraforming Mars. But yeah, we get this big information dump, and it ends with, as a mysterious force moves across the valley, it leaves behind only silence and death. And then immediately, this new metal music kicks in, and it's like, yeah. This is 2001.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that's I got to be honest. That's always something that does give me pause when a movie starts off with, 5 minutes of exposition, setting it all up. When you probably could have told us that in a different way.
I mean, Red Planet did the same thing. Hashtag BP.
Right.
Like, I'm not, but like, we just watched Red Planet for this podcast, and it again opens up a Carrie-Anne Moss like catching us up. Like, okay, look, it's the future. Here's what we're doing. We got to colonize Mars, and it's like, I think I would have learned this like the next 10 minutes of the movie. Just
right. Like, it's like having somebody tell it to me is like the least cinematic thing possible. It's like it's the least visual thing you can do, and yeah. I mean, I'm not going to fault anyone. When you got a lot of information, you got to make a choice. And it may have even been that, like, it might have been like a Blade Runner situation where, like, that was added later because they, like,
Sure.
test screenings, they were like, oh, they don't get it. They don't understand. And so they ended up adding it in later just to be like, all right, here you go. Here's your information. And I don't know. I always prefer the movie kind of explains it to me. Like, the Blade Runner one is so weird because I don't think that movie's particularly confusing without it. But apparently audiences at the time were really confused. But yeah, I got it. It always is a red flag to me when a movie starts off with just like a heavy exposition dump. So
it's wild that Mars was so hot during this time period. I mean, we talked about this off and on throughout this month, and I think before we even started this month, you mentioned like all these movies come out in a span of 5 years. I mean, Mars Attacks is kind of the outlier because that's about Martians and not the planet of Mars. And then, as we discussed, 97, we had the Mars rover, and I'm guessing that's kind of what leads to this influx of Mars content in the mainstream. And between just 2 years, the year of 2000 and 2001, we have 3 movies about Mars, essentially with Mars in the title. I mean, the one of them is called Red Planet, but it's all very prominently about the planet of Mars, and all in some way about terraforming and colonizing Mars so we can live there because our Earth is becoming uninhabitable. I mean, Ghosts of Mars never gets to that point, but you got to imagine that's why we're on the surface of Mars in this movie.
you would think, and I was talking with I think my mom about that, and we kind of agreed that I think the Mars rover was definitely an impetus for like, oh, we actually know what Mars looks like now. We gotta do some stuff. And I was just looking at a page that's like list of films set on Mars. So Mars Attacks is not on this list because Mars Attacks does not technically take place on Mars. Interesting on this list though, Species 2, released in 1998, apparently has sections that take place on Mars. And then even like TV movies, and then, but like I said, Mission to Mars, Red Planet, Ghosts of Mars, all in I actually want to look at this, folks, because me looking up information on the internet is the
It's
most
the hallmark
audio
of our
quality
show. It's
thing.
why people are here.
So March
Listen,
10th.
give us some clacks on the keyboard, Andrew. Give us some clacking.
I just spelled my name, folks. So Mission to Mars is March 2000, Red Planet is November 2000, and Ghost of Mars is August 2001. So these movies are all released in like a 20-month period. No, March to August, like a less than a year and a half between the first and the last of these movies. So in a year and a half, you have 3 theatrically released movies about us on Mars. Now, obviously, Mission to Mars and Red Planet are the much more analogous ones, but like Ghosts of Mars obviously playing more by the kind of just, hey, we're on Mars, deal with it rules. But yeah, still, strange it happened 3 times.
It's funny we got these Doom comparisons because my biggest take on this movie is that it is the most based on a video game movie I've ever seen that's not actually based on a video game. Like just the plot, the feel of the movie and the look and the acting, to be frank. Like it feels like this period of time with movies based on a video game, whether it be Alone in the Dark or Doom, which that one I haven't seen, but it's Blood Rain. I mean, it feels like that era of based on a video game movie.
I can definitely see that. And obviously Doom comes out 4 years later, 2005. It should be noted that after Ghosts of Mars, we don't get a Mars movie pretty much until Doom 4 years later. And then Mars dies off pretty quickly there. And then it dies off pretty quickly again. Although The Martian does come out in 2015, which is real good.
The definitive movie of this based on the surface of Mars.
I think so. It has to be. But yeah, it is still just wild to me that Mars was so hot there for a while. You know, that didn't happen when we got pictures from like the surface of Venus. We just got Beetlejuice for that.
What? That led to Beetlejuice? Is that what you're...
No, isn't the world that the sandworms are on, isn't that Venus?
What? Is this in the movie, or is this like some lore that I don't know about?
I don't know. Hold on.
Did you dream this, Andrew?
I might have.
You read. I'm gonna leave you to research. I've never heard that before. I'm fascinated by this take. It's my headcanon now, whether you find anything to back you up or not. As far as this movie goes, I think we've kind of hit the high points by talking about the finale, kind of the setup and the look and everything, but it is pretty bonkers throughout. We talked about kind of the branching narrative structure, but I've got to shout out this one scene where we've got Desolation and his group of friends, and they are they're in like this dining hall. Dining hall is not the right word, but all in a room. And one of them is going to open up this can, and he's kind of like trying to impress a woman. And he holds the can down on the table. He grabs a big like cleaver, chops off the end of the can, but then holds up his hand and he's missing his thumb. He chopped off his thumb as well as the end of the can. And Ice Cube just goes, "Yeah, that's what you get, dumbass." And the guy passes out, and that's it. What the hell is this?
It's Saturn, not Venus.
Is that... Okay, hang on. I've got to get your take on this can scene, but real quick. What? And is that in the movie Beetlejuice?
I guess.
You just found a source that says sandworms are on Saturn.
Saturn.
I've seen that movie a lot. I haven't seen it in a while, but I've seen it a lot. I don't ever remember them saying, "Oh, this door leads to Saturn."
I don't know, man.
But good pull, I guess, Andrew. Good pull with that. How about that guy cutting his thumb off, though, huh?
Pretty rad.
Pretty cool.
Yeah.
It's just a total... They made this whole prop hand gag just for this little scene. Andrew, another take I had on this movie, and talked about this with you a little bit off mic, is that it reminds me a lot of like, oh man, you and I are both fans of physical media. We've talked about that. Here's a real express version of what I'm trying to say is we kind of do these deep dives into like these prestige Blu-ray releases of these obscure movies from the 70s and 80s, and you and I both like to go through and pick some out and revisit them and check it out, and most of the time acknowledge that it's kind of schlocky B-movie material, but that's kind of the appeal, you know what I mean? And I had this big kind of epiphany recently where like these movies that were churned out in the 70s and early 80s before home video were kind of made on a shoestring budget, not with quality in mind, and relied heavily on gimmicky, flashy marketing and a memorable poster to get people into the theater and make some money. It wasn't that the movie was great and had good word of mouth. It was like you see the poster and go, wow, that seems wild. I got to check it out. And that was how it's being sold. And now they're releasing them all again on Blu-ray on these little boutique websites, and they're doing it all over again with these brand new slipcovers and artwork and limited runs. And it's kind of just trying to get you to buy the movie. This movie, Ghost of Mars, reminds me a lot of that era. I know that all sounds backhanded, but like I like this style of movie. It's got its important place in cinema history. But the fact that it would have like this little, like that's the thing you'd walk out of the theater and like tell your friends. Like I saw this wild movie. This dude cuts his finger off. It's kind of like, I've never seen the movie Zombie, Andrew, but I know that there's a spike that goes through an eyeball. That's like the scene from the movie that everyone knows about. You know, you kind of, these movies have like a legacy or myth that builds around them. You know, I've never seen Cannibal Holocaust, but I know a big memorable scene from that movie. And this one's not as gory as some of those examples.
No.
But I feel like that's just the kind of gag that's like, I've never seen that in a movie before. That's, you know, again, that's like the sticking point, the talking point that you're going to remember from this movie, and hopefully get another, you know, get your friends into the movie theater so they can make a few more bucks.
Well, I wish I'd done that when I was 14. Maybe we would have gotten, maybe we would have gotten Ghosts of Mars on Earth. Who knows?
It feels like they are not so much setting up a sequel, but there's this ending where like the threat is still there, and we get like this scene at the end where Desolation and Lieutenant Ballard team up again, and they go to face that threat, and like, you know, they have the witty lines like, you be a good crook, you be a good cop, and I don't know, if this movie made 80 million domestic, I could see them making a Ghost of Mars too.
Hey, maybe that's the one that brings Snake Plissken in. You know,
on the crossover.
Escape from Mars. Escape from the Ghosts of Mars. But yeah, and I don't know. I think that was partly
Escape from the Big Trouble and the Ghost of Mars.
Oh, it's just Jack Burton in this too. I'm not saying that's a problem. In fact,
I'm just trying to see how long I can get this title.
I'm saying I'm into that. I actually have the years ago, a couple of years ago, not that many years ago. John Carpenter co-wrote a comic called Old Man Jack, which was like a Big Trouble in Little China sequel with old man Jack Burton doing his thing again, and I thought it was wonderful. I loved it so much.
Sounds great.
They did 3 volumes. I think it was 12 issues, so there's 3 volumes of it, and it was one of those annoying things where the second and third volumes were easy to find, but the first one was out of print, and I hate that. Well, anytime that happens with a comic, a certain thought runs through my head. It's on a shelf somewhere. At some comic shop in somewhere in this country, that trade is sitting on a shelf for cover price. And I will say this, for Big Trouble in Little China, Old Man Jack Volume 1, it's exactly what happened. I walked into one of the shops I go to regularly, walked over to their shelf, and right there, $16.99. Boom. So what I'm saying is all of you guys trying to sell it for 60, 70, 80 bucks on Amazon and eBay, I win. And same thing happened with, I was doing Walt Simonson's Thor, just a classic Thor run. And I found volumes 1, 2, 3, and 4 easily of the new versions. And I'm not a completist for like trade dress, but I couldn't find volume 5. every version of Volume 5 was sold out. The one that matched, and even the old one that didn't match. And I just started looking. Every shop I went to, I just looked at the shelves, and lo and behold, I found Volume 5 sitting on somebody's shelf, cover price. Folks, don't give in to scalpers. Unless you have looked and haven't found it, in which case, just be wise. Just know that something like that, it's going to come back in print at some point. It's never going to disappear. But Ghosts of Mars, maybe not. I don't know. Who knows? I don't even know if this movie has a Blu-ray release.
I did, speaking of like these boutique Blu-ray, this feels like the kind of movie that might have that like big prestige special release.
This feels like a Shout Factory.
It has
feels
a
like a Shout
standard
Factory.
regular studio Blu-ray release, but maybe it just hasn't been long enough. Maybe eventually it'll come around to have that release that revisits, and it's got, you know, new interviews with Ice Cube as the bonus features, and you got to buy it all over again.
Go. It's Ice Cube trying to be nice about it.
Nice.
But nice Cube. Nice. Very nice.
Andrew, like Arnold Schwarzenegger in Total Recall, we visited Mars this month. Or did we? There was actually, in our Discord, someone asked, like, hey, why aren't you doing Total Recall this month? And for one, that's a well-received movie. I'm not sure it quite qualifies for our premise, but does that movie actually take place on Mars, or is it just a simulation? Man, there's no definitive answer.
Well,
Do you have a definitive answer on that? I'm not sure we'll ever actually get to talk about Total Recall. Do you?
Well, I mean, Mars Attacks doesn't take place on Mars, and we still talked about it. But
But it's about Martians, and
that's true,
there is at least a shot on Mars. I mean, and Mars is in the damn title, so I think it.
Yeah,
qualifies.
I was trying to think. Like, I think I just looked up Total Recall. Total Recall is an 83% on Rotten Tomatoes, and made like $260 million off of a maximum $80 million budget. There is no metric by which Total Recall is not a huge success.
Now, the sequel, or the remake with Colin Farrell for sure qualifies.
But that doesn't have Mars in it, does it?
That's what I was going to say. I haven't seen it, but I heard that. I heard that they took Mars out of it.
It does Mars. I think it's...
I can't wrap my head around remaking Total Recall and not having it be about Mars. That's wild. I part of me is curious how they do that and why, and I kind of want to see it. And part of me is like, I don't know if I want to do that for myself, but maybe if it ends up being an episode of our podcast, I won't have a choice. But Andrew, the original Total Recall, though, do you have a definitive answer in your mind as far as, was that a simulation? Was that the vacation that he requested, or did it all actually happen?
It's a great question. Because everything that ends up happening could easily be seen as part of a simulation, from the woman he picks, from the plot to everything. It could all be seen.
He wants to be a spy on an adventure, and he gets caught up in a situation where he gets to live out that fantasy. So is he living out that fantasy in a simulation, or did those events, it's the fun thing of the movie, and it's got like this ominous final shot where it fades to white.
I mean, if I'm going to pick something, I'm going to pick that it happened. Like that.
It's more fun, right? It's more
fun to believe that it happened. Yeah. Like, and also it's based off of a short story called "We Can Remember It For You Wholesale," which is it's first off, it's a short story. It's like 6 pages. It's, they really took that and ran with it. But the premise of that short story, and I like it a lot, is that this guy comes in, and I think his name in the story is Douglas Quaid. He wants the vacation, but every time they try to give him a super fantastical situation, they see that it's already in his brain. So like they like go to give him the secret agent mission, and they're like, well, he already has that here. They're like, wait, how could he already have that unless he's been here before? So it becomes this stacked story, and then finally they figure out that the solution to kind of satiate his entire, because curiosity, because that's kind of his problem, is that he keeps having all these visions of Mars. Similar to how Quaid is in the movie. There's just this this thing nagging at him that he can't get rid of. And so after they run all these tests, they run all these calculations, they figure out the exact thing they need to put into his memory to satiate all of his curiosity. And it's this kind of wild scenario where, as a kid, these aliens visited from another planet. He ended up being this big thing that like introduced them to Earth, made them feel like Earth was okay, and saved them from some kind of danger, and then sent them away. And they left him like a flashlight or something as like a memento of their thanks. And so the whole theory is they're like, okay, we'll put these memories in his head. We'll go plant the flashlight in his dumb house so that he goes home and he knows it's there and it's going to be fine. And this is going to satiate his curiosity and everything about Mars forever. And they're like, okay, cool. Give him the memories. He already has them. So the whole premise of the story is for
Wait, is that it? I was caught up in your retelling of the story.
You find out that the scenario they were going to give him to satiate himself and make sure that he never questioned Mars again is something he actually experienced.
Well, that's fun. Is that Philip K. Dick?
Yeah, of course it is.
Yeah, of course. And does Quaid have a thick Austrian accent in the short story?
It doesn't come through in the text. There's nothing saying he can't, I guess. But but no, I actually love that story a lot. It's I have this Philip K. Dick reader on my shelf here that you can't see, but that was what I was looking for, because he has all the books, but then he has a bunch of short stories, and a lot of the stuff that he did that they turned into movies and stuff was actually short stories. And so like Paycheck, very similar, was a short story that got turned into a movie that exists. And
Minority Report's pretty short. I read that nicely.
Yeah, that one was short. Honestly, like Blade Runner is a book. Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? Man in the High Castle is a book. Yeah, I mean, he has tons of books. There's so many on my shelf here. Just A Scanner Darkly, Man in the High Castle, Bayless.
Yeah, all right, we get it, Andrew. We get it.
Yeah, we get it. I have lots of books.
You got a lot of dicks. We got it.
All the dicks, man. I looked at my shelf the other day and I was like, it could use more dicks. But yeah, I don't know. I've always been kind of led to believe that, like, so in the spirit of that short story and knowing what the short story is, I've always just kind of assumed that the latter half of that movie is actually happening. Just because obviously it's more fun, but obviously it does leave on that note. You know, it's not as open-ended as like Inception, although we've talked about how whether the top stops spinning doesn't matter for Inception before. But you know, I'm certain there's still people that are like, it's definitely not real. And I'm like, I'm sure the movie supports either way. Like, absolutely, you know, it's not like Blade Runner, where like the whole is Deckard a replicant was like a late stage retcon. Like,
yes,
that was definitely like fans overanalyzing it and rethinking it. And I'm not going to say you can't think it, but when like Ridley Scott is like, oh yeah, that's totally what I was going for, he's lying. He is 100% lying. Like, if Harrison Ford, the guy who played Deckard, was like, yeah, that was never a conversation, I'm inclined to believe Harrison Ford, because he's, you know, he would know. And although I will always forever love that Denis Villeneuve 100% just blew right past that question in Blade Runner 2049.
We got a definitive answer now. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Andrew, we're heading into a new month, the month of October. And just like last year, this is of course going to be, it's spooky season. We got Halloween, the holiday I'm talking about, coming up in the month of October. So we like to theme the month kind of around that idea. And last year, we talked all about slashers, specifically A Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th. This year, we are revisiting slashers. For the most part, this year, we're talking all about movies that were influenced and inspired by the 1996 film Scream. I don't know what we're calling it, a Scream month, Scream influenced month. We're working on the name.
Scream adjacent, who knows?
Scream adjacent, that's good. We have the lineup picked out. Head over to our Discord. We'll post all the movies we're covering, but we're going to kick it off with the Scream franchise itself, Scream 3, where most people would say the kind of starts to lose steam, maybe. It's the first one of the franchise to be certified rotten on Rotten Tomatoes, and we have a change in the creative team behind the movie. We'll talk all about it next week, but we're kicking off with Scream 3. And, the Scream, the franchise, the movie being a big hit, and not only brought back slashers, inspired, kind of revitalized the slasher genre, but it added, this this meta into the mainstream, inspired things that way. It added young, hot cast of people type movies. It kind of branches in all these different ways, and we're going to examine all those influences. But Andrew, I know you're excited about this month. This is your baby. You kind of had this idea percolating for a while, and we've been kind of going back and forth as far as which movies we should be covering this month. But I'm excited. This is going to be a fun watch for the month of October.
I am too, because it first off, I definitely drove this one. Usually, folks, like, not to say that either one of us takes like a higher approach, but usually it's a collaborative effort. This really was one where I kind of just like handed it to you, and I said, "This is what we're doing." So
I said, "Yeah, looks like, good."
Yeah,
right.
So a little bit of deliberation on one of the inclusions, but we'll talk about that later. But yeah, I was watching. Obviously, I love the entire Scream franchise. Like, obviously, I'm not even going to say it. I have no issue saying positive things about Scream 3. I think Scream 3 still has a lot to give, even if it is, at least from a Rotten Tomatoes perspective, the weakest of the franchise. Not necessarily a stance shared with fans of the franchise. We'll talk about that next week. But just looking back at that, it was a little bit of watching things with Liz, too, just kind of looking back at things that were around that time, that had the same kind of idea of, let's get this hot young cast, put them in a slasher whodunit, and see what happens. So I'm excited to look at, start with the franchise itself, dive into some new installments, and then you'll see it in the Discord, but then we cap things off with a little bit of an interesting ripple where maybe they tried to use that formula to revitalize something. So I'm excited. I love these movies. I love slashers. I love whodunits. The Scream type movies, obviously, there's checking all the boxes for me. Just you've already got a horror slasher, and with something like Jason or Freddy, like, who the killer is. You know who that is. There's no question there. Whereas with Scream and most of these movies that we're watching, it's an unknown killer, and that makes it a lot more fun for me. Obviously, being the fan of mysteries that I am. Once again, pointing to my bookshelf with all my many leather-bound books that smell of rich mahogany. And but yeah, I this was an idea that I had, just kind of pulling up some of these movies.
Sick Anchorman reference. That is, you're so hip.
You know me, man. Only the most topical of references. But I
threw out Zoolander earlier, so I guess I can't really throw.
Yeah, I was gonna say, watch it there, buddy. Are you serious? I just explained that a moment ago. But no, I am excited. I love pretty much all the movies we're talking about, or at least I think there's lots to like in all of them. So I'm excited for you guys to see what they are. And it obviously won't be the last time we talk about horror movies or slashers, but I'm excited to bring this month of movies to you guys.
And until then, until October, until Spooky Month and slashers and Scream, just remember that maybe not every movie is great,
but all movies have greatness.
Thank you to Mark Benavides for singing our theme song. You can check him out on Instagram at NotThatMarkAnthony. And thanks to Mitch for the music. You can follow him on Twitter at I'm a Biggie Boy, and check our show notes for the SoundCloud link. Check out our store on TeePublic for some Best of the Rest merch. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend. That is the only way that we grow. And follow us on social media at BOTRcast. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, shoot. I agree completely.